So let me share my screen with you and show you today's delightful lesson, which is going to be poetry. All right, so it's actually quite rare for you to encounter poetry in your IG textbook, which I find quite frustrating, because if you really, really want to teach students analysis skills, or if you are interested in learning in perfecting or honing your analysis skills, you should, and I'm glad to see somebody approves of poetry, excellent, good, you should really look at poetry, because poetry is thought condensed. You have to work at the meaning of poetry. It will challenge you more than any other text generally. So that is why it is so important to look at poetry. And yes, good point. In the previous years, the English books would have been full of it, full of the poetry, right? And now it's kind of missing. And in fact, as you go on, the poetry kind of disappears, which I think it's because Cambridge have a literature course that they run. So if you're really interested in poetry, etc., you can do the literature course. But because the whole course in IG is orientated towards analysis, I think it's worth our while to just take a bit of time to look at some poetry. All right, so you'll always learn something from what we do in the live lessons, all right? And today we're going to look at how you can pay attention to detail, how you can garner more meaning from something in the form of a creative text. Okay, so not necessarily something we always encounter, something very creative. So let's have a look at this poem. It's The Secret by Denise Levertov. All right, let's just have a read through. The first thing to do is read through it, get an overall sense, and we'll look at it in more detail. Okay. Two girls discover the secret of life in a sudden line of poetry. I, who don't know the secret, wrote the line. They told me, through a third person, they had found it, but not what it was, not even what line it was. No doubt by now, more than a week later, they have forgotten the secret, the line, the name of the poem. I love them for finding what I can't find, and for loving me for the line I wrote, and for forgetting it so that 1,000 times, till death finds them, they may discover it again, in other lines, in other happenings, and for wanting to know it, for assuming there is such a secret, yes, for that most of all. Okay, and don't worry if you're late, I'm glad you could join. Thank you for letting me know. All right, so the secret. Remember, when you first encounter something like a poem, it's always a very good idea to pay attention to the title, because usually it gives a hint of the kind of thing that's going to be explored in the poem, right? Not always, but in general. So we have this idea of a secret in mind. And usually you might want to find out what the secret is. What is the secret? And we never really do find out what the secret is, which is ironic, isn't it? Let's look at this poem again. What is it about? Well, two girls discover the secret of life in a sudden line of poetry. I, who don't know the secret, wrote the line. Right, so there's two ideas going on here. They discover a secret, and the poet who wrote this poem doesn't even realize that the secret was in this line of poetry that they wrote. All right. So it's a bit strange. What exactly is going on here? Two girls discover the secret of life in a sudden line of poetry. What's interesting about this idea of it being sudden? Why should it be sudden? Do you think? Any suggestions? And just quickly, I'm going to try my hardest to keep quiet, because usually I try and talk over whilst you're typing. I'm going to try and keep quiet so you can get your thoughts out before I go on to the next point, okay? Good, yes. It's this idea of a sudden realization. Yeah, they found it unexpectedly, yes. And so this is what's amazing about poetry or art or music or anything that is creative in general. It can have a very sudden effect on the reader, on the audience, something that just sort of hits you. And that's this idea of realization. Good. So remember, when you have a poem, it's always a great idea, and I'm using the American spelling here. We usually use the British spelling, okay? Realization, sorry, it's always a good idea to annotate your poems when you look at them. Okay, I know you don't have this in front of you, but I'm showing you how it can be done. Right, so the sudden line of poetry, they're confronted with something they weren't aware of before. Right, so yes, ideas of realization. So now we have a change in subject. There's two girls, and now we're moving to I, who don't know the secret, wrote the line. Okay, so I mentioned this before. This is ironic, isn't it? That the person who wrote this poem, that we never know which poem it is, not even we don't know the poem, we aren't exposed to that poem, but the writer doesn't even know what the secret was. How strange, right? So I'm going to go on before I read this lovely suggestion given by one of you, okay? It says, they told me, so these two girls told the writer through a third person they had found it, but not what it was. So let's think about that. Let's ponder this concept, okay? And I'll now go back to the students, to one of your lovely suggestions. I feel as though the entire poem is about finding secrets, yes, hidden within poems. Absolutely right. It might not be an actual secret, true, but it could be the key for them to the lock of life. So to unlock some sort of ideas about life in general. What is the meaning of life, which is a huge philosophical question, isn't it? It shows how each poem can affect different people in ways that the poet did not even mean for it to be. Very nice. Wow, well, you've just summed this up. I don't even know if I have to go through the rest of the poem here. So, brilliant, well done. Yes, this is about exploring a bigger idea and how ultimately art affects life. Sorry, that's wrong. Art affects life. All right, so this whole idea is that art affects life, reflects life, and can make us question things in a way that other things can't. Just your everyday texts don't really impact you, or everyday ideas. So this is very important. The power that poetry, that words can have. All right, so let's have a look at this idea of these brackets here. They told me through a third person they had found it. So did the two girls actually tell the poet what had been going on? So yes, going back to the poem, the girls did not actually speak to the poem. It's coming through somebody else. And what does this show? What does this show about ideas? What does it tell us about human nature even? Secrecy, okay, interesting. Secrecy. Yes, there's definitely secrecy in life. That's true. People like to keep things secret. We can't know everything. We like to share secrets. Yes. The sharing of secrecy, for example. Good. And it also illustrates this idea of information that is passed on. We are social beings. We can't help but discuss ideas. We can't help but tell each other about things that have happened, like I've just done with you. This is the sort of thing that is very much, it points towards human nature. But also it illustrates this idea of things not always being that clear. Even the secret in the poem is not clear to the poet who wrote the poem, and then the secret is, or the secret is hinted at, the fact that it's been found has been hinted at to him through a third party. So it's very strange. And this is what life is. It's kind of, things are hidden, things aren't always known. We could even get onto this idea of fake news if we wanted to, but let's not go there. Here's some more suggestions. There are secrets in life we cannot always know. Brilliant, yes. We cannot always know. That's why life is the way it is, why it is so mysterious. And because it's coming from a third person, it might not be exactly true. Very good point. Yes. It means we could question this. Did two girls actually find a secret in this poem? And is this person a reliable source? Okay. So this you can apply to many areas of life, especially journalism, for example. How do we know that a source revealed this and said that? And how do we determine what is real news, what is fake news? So things are always questionable. All right. So very nice ideas. We haven't even gotten to the fourth stanza. Remember, if you're talking about, I don't know if I've ever told you this before, but if you're talking about paragraphs in poetry, we talk about stanzas or verses, but the correct terminology is a stanza. So these are all stanzas. Stanza 1, stanza 2, stanza 3, stanza 4. We haven't gotten to the fourth stanza, and we're already looking at very deep philosophical concepts, which is great. So through a third person, they had found it, but not even what it was. So the secret is still unrevealed. Not even what line it was, because remember, it was a sudden line in the poem that revealed the secret of life. Right? So the poet doesn't even have an idea of which line it was. And then the poet continues, no doubt by now, more than a week later, they have forgotten the secret. What is going on here? What's actually being said? Okay, and here is a suggestion coming through about the poem. The poet did not speak to the girls in person, so we're talking about this third person idea. So he was not able to have a full understanding of what they were feeling. Yes, because also it's about feeling. Therefore, what they felt was only shown to him through directed speech, through what somebody else reported to him. And even then, did that person even show what they felt, what those two girls felt? We don't even know how they felt. We just know there was a realization and that it was a discovery of some kind. So yes, you're absolutely right. So it's all about this passing on of ideas. It's almost like that broken telephone concept, which is interesting that the poet here has included this in her poem. And if we look at this idea here of it's been more, time has passed and something has happened because time has passed. What has happened? They have forgotten the secret. What is ultimately being commented on here? Okay, here we go. Because their realization was so sudden, it was not well established and can thus easily be forgotten. Oh, very interesting. Yes, maybe because it was so sudden, it wasn't properly absorbed, you could argue. They didn't assimilate it as part of who they are, as their identity, for example. Yes, that's one of them. Here's another suggestion, that they have forgotten their secret was so sudden because it was so sudden. Yes, okay, so you're saying the same thing. Yes, because it was sudden. But what else is it talking about in terms of human nature and the way that we operate? Here's a suggestion. As time passes, you need new keys to understand life. So new secrets are found through new poems. Yes, this idea of renewal, which is touched on a bit later in the poem. Nice, great point. Life has gone on, they've been so busy in their lives, they couldn't use the secret. Yes, life gets in the way of these big, wondrous ideas, right? So, brilliant suggestions, everybody, great. Human nature. This is all about human nature. You know, we'll hear about things in the news that shock us, and it's devastating. And then if you look down the line a couple of months, years, or whatever later, is that impact still with you? Is it even relevant? We're so busy getting on with our everyday lives. So in a way, it's almost like it's good to be reminded from time to time through things like poetry, etc., that they are important things to consider in life. Even though the little practicalities of everyday life get in the way, we must still remember that we are human. Okay, so very nice. So we tend to forget about things we do not take note of. Yes, that's right. So often when we feel things, it's only for that specific moment once felt, it is now dealt with and finished in the person's life. So yes, so that human nature, that sort of human response to things, where we move on, and also because we don't have much choice but to move on. So this is talking about something in human nature that we all have. So no doubt by now, more than a week later, they have forgotten the secret, the line, the name of the poem. And then the poet goes on to say something very strange. I love them for finding what I can't find, and for loving me for the line I wrote, and for forgetting it. Okay, so we've touched on this idea here. Yeah, this idea of forgetting, but perhaps it's through this forgetting that this idea of renewal can come into play. All right, so let's just read this section again. I love them for finding what I can't find, and for loving me for the line I wrote, and for forgetting it, so that 1,000 times, and this is what we call hyperbole. Hyperbole is deliberate exaggeration to create an effect. All right, so 1,000 times, they're going to forget it. So 1,000 times till death finds them, till they die. And it's a very poetic way of expressing this, till death finds them. So it's almost like they don't have any control over their lives. Everything is predetermined. They may discover it again in other lives, in other happenings. Okay, so in other words, like I said, art affects or reflects life, right? This idea of art reflecting life. And you'll see that the ideas explored in this poem can happen in any other situation outside of this poem. You might find, like I'm saying, if we read the news, if we're affected by something, it just shows you that these ideas are reflected in the reality of life. Okay? So here's a comment about death finding them. Oh, very nice. Okay. When death finds them, that means they wouldn't have used the secret that he also couldn't use. Yes, exactly. Death obviously doesn't know the secret to life, because otherwise he wouldn't be dead. They wouldn't be dying. Because the secret of life should reveal something wider and bigger to us. And here's another suggestion that I just missed, sorry, about the renewal. It's rediscovering joy. Rediscovering, oh my goodness, it's just awful today, sorry. Rediscovering joy. Okay. So they are rediscovering joy, this idea of renewal, the secret that has still not been revealed. And here's another suggestion. The poet understands that with forgetting a line, it makes space for a new feeling for a line. They can now find many secrets that affect them more or affect them again. Good, yes, absolutely. So the whole point is, when you encounter something, even though it gives you a sudden realization, and you were to leave that text and you would come back to it at another point in time, if you reread that text, it might not have the same effect on you, or it might have a very different kind of effect altogether, which is surprising. And that's what happens when you reread text, when you rewatch things, even if you rewatch a series, and maybe you've been following a whole series, and then by the end you go back and you start again, you'll pick up things that were completely different to the first time that you watched, that you exposed yourself to this art form. And so that is a brilliant point. Great, I'm just going to read some more suggestions. You guys are so good with the poetry here. So the only that affect them more, that affects them again. The secret of life could be that death is inevitable, and the only way to live is to understand that it will happen, and you must find small joys in life where it can end suddenly. Yes, there's that aspect of the secret of life is actually just living life. Maybe it's those little everyday things, and the fact that life is limited, that there is death, should make us enjoy it even more. So there are just so many ideas coming out of this. Brilliant, guys, this is so nice. Oh yes, and then this idea of finding secrets that affect them again or affects them in a different way. What I wanted to point out was that, yes, sometimes you'll be able to encounter an idea like we are exploring here, and you'll notice it pops up in a book that you read, or it crops up in the story of one of the events of the day that a friend has told you about. And that is how Literature, words, ideas can expand our mind and our understanding of the world around us. Okay, brilliant. Let's have a look at the close of the poem. And for wanting to know it, okay, for wanting to know this secret. So this is what the poet approves of in these girls. He likes the fact that they wanted to know the secret, for even assuming there is such a secret. Yes, for that most of all. Because this is an interesting concept. And the poet is saying, well, you're assuming there's a secret in my poem. And I'm glad. There might even be a bit of sort of sarcasm here. I'm glad that you assumed there was a secret, but there's no secret. What is this referring to? What idea is being explored here? Assuming there is such a secret. Okay, just because we're always limited for time, I'm going to butt in. Sorry if you're trying to type and think and I'm ruining it for you. But we've had another suggestion here. Human nature comes in as we're curious about things. Yes, this idea of curiosity about life. Yes, they're assuming there is curiosity. Oh my goodness. And yes, we all have different perspectives. Absolutely. We all have different perspectives of life. Very nice. I think he may appreciate the fact that even though he wrote the poem not feeling much emotion in it, someone else was able to feel depth in it. Absolutely. And that's what it boils down to, these different perspectives. And you've gotten such brilliant ideas on this. You have covered so many of the main ideas that are revealed through this poem, and it's quite a beautiful poem for that. Here, there are some questions that I've taken from a literature anthology. And just before I move on to some of the questions, I just want to see more of your suggestions. Curiosity kills the cat is a suggestion here. The fact that they are so curious about the secret, they will be found by death sooner. Oh, that's interesting. Yes, there's always that idea of if you dabble too much with the mysteries of life, you could it could be a disastrous ending for you. It could bring in those kind of darker ideas. It's true. So yes, an aspect of that could be explored in the poem. Very nice thoughts, everybody. Wonderful to see you all thinking about the poetry. So from this textbook, there are some questions that I want us to look at. Quote one word that proves that the discovery took the girls by surprise. Well, remember that word, it was sudden. We've answered most of these questions, but I just want to see the kinds of questions you could get on a poem, for example. Does the poet know the secret? Explain how this is possible. And we've already said this. This is that perspective thing, that perspective thing, right? Where the poet doesn't even realize that perhaps they've just discovered, they just revealed this huge secret to the meaning of life. But from their perspective, that's not really what it is. So it's an interesting poem that explores perspectives. Explain how the poet found out the girls' discovery. We've talked about that third party passing on the news. So which makes us question, what is truth, right? What is truth? And then, has this discovery made the poet arrogant? That's an interesting question. Has this discovery made the poet arrogant? Because rightly so, maybe the poet should be arrogant. You have discovered the secret to life in your poem. You've revealed it. And it certainly has not made the poet arrogant. And we know this because of the fact that they admit, I, who wrote it, didn't even realize it was there. Or things like, I love the fact that they can find what I can't find. I love the fact that they have a different perspective on a poem that I created, which shows you how art works in a sort of outwards movement. It can affect people in very different ways, which is just so interesting. And he loves the fact that they will even forget this secret, this important line that he wrote. They're probably going to forget it, and he's okay with that, or he or she they're okay with that, okay? So how interesting. That means that the poet has succeeded at doing what poets do and is very happy to have done that. And it's not about arrogance. Right? So the poet believes the girls will constantly rediscover this secret. Explain her reasoning. Yes, because every time you read a novel or a poem or any other kind of text, you will find that it affects you in a different way. Maybe because you've also experienced something from between the first reading and the next reading. Maybe because you're paying more attention, you're in a different mood, all kinds of things. This is really talking about human nature. And how, for example, we have texts that are thousands of years old and in various cultures, and there's still some beauty to be found in those texts that were written so long ago, and the people who wrote those texts, their lives are probably vastly different to the kinds of lives we're living. Now, see the paragraph below. So this is an explanation written by a student on the poet, and we have 2 minutes left so we can get through this. The poet's message is that interpretation is the key to understanding. It isn't important what the author meant to write. It only matters how we interpret what they have written. In other words, analysis. We'll come back to that. It is important to create ideas. Right? Create ideas and allow others the freedom to interpret them as they want. All right, so it's freedom of interpretation. Now in analysis, there is freedom to a certain extent, as long as you follow a certain methodology, okay, the Cambridge methodology. But explore the ideas that a text presents to you from your perspective, as long as you justify it in a logical way, using quotes from the text to support the claims you make. Okay. And just to finish off, here's a suggestion. I found the last stanza more of the poet saying thanks to the readers for even thinking that he could have known such a big secret. Yes, she humbles herself. She humbles herself before these readers, which is wonderful. And so poetry is not about ego and arrogance. It's about influencing the world, influencing thought, making people feel something.